One part of this game that feels a bit unsatisfying is the fact that when you shoot things, they just disappear from the screen. When you hit the asteroids with the laser, there should be some sort of explosion. To do this, we're going to need to create an explosion module. This will have the same overall structure as the player and asteroid modules. We will start by importing modules, then we'll load the graphics, and then define the explosion class. For the graphics, I've drawn this simple explosion image. You can design your own or look to OpenGameArt. You could also have an animated explosion and apply the ideas we had for animating the spaceship to this module. But for this game, we're just going to keep it simple. Rather than animating the explosion, we're just going to make it fade away over a few frames. This will create the sense of dust settling. The explosion class will have both an initialization and an update method. For the initialization method, we're going to need to give it quite a bit more information. We will want the explosion to appear in the correct place, which is why we are passing it an X and a Y coordinate. We're also going to control the size of the explosion. For larger asteroids, we want larger explosions, and for smaller asteroids, we want smaller explosions. You'll notice that when we're defining the image, we're going to scale the explosion to be the size that we give it. The last thing we need is a parameter to control how fast the explosion fades away. For enemies, we'll have it go at 1 speed, but for the player, we will want the dust to linger longer, which will add a sense of magnitude and importance to the explosion. For the attributes, there are 2 quantities. The first one is called alpha, and the second is the decay rate. In the context of computer graphics, alpha represents the transparency of the image. For Pygame, this is an integer from 0 to 255. At 255, the sprite is completely opaque, and at 0, it's completely transparent. We can see how these 2 values interact in the update method. We're going to fade out the sprite over time by just multiplying the current alpha by the decay rate at each frame. We have to turn this number into an integer because the image alpha requires an integer. And this will continue to happen each frame until the alpha has dropped to 0, at which point we will kill the sprite. And now that the sprite class is ready, we need to create the explosions. This will happen based on the collisions. For the laser hitting the asteroid, the collision variable gives us all the asteroids that have been hit by lasers. We will want to put an explosion in the center of each of those. We will also send it the size of the object so that the explosion fits the asteroid. And then we send it a decay rate. You can play with different decay rates to get different effects. We create the sprite with that information, and then add it to the All Sprites group. In this case, that's the only group we want to add it to because there aren't going to be any interactions between the explosions and the other sprites. What about if the player gets hit? Right now, the game ends abruptly. What we want to have is a big explosion, and then end the game shortly after explosion fades away. The trick we're going to use is to create the explosion where the spaceship is, disable the spaceship's activity, and then hide it by teleporting it off the screen. You might also try to do this by destroying the sprite completely, but we're going to use the player sprite to hold other pieces of information that we're going to need. Inside of our spaceship class, we're going to add a dead flag and a hide method to hide the spaceship off screen. For the hide method, all we need to do is set the dead flag to true, move the spaceship off the screen, and set the cooldown timer so that we can watch the explosion fade away. The dead flag is new, and it simply makes it so that we have an indicator to check for before quitting the game. Since we're also using the same cooldown timer as before, this also prevents us from shooting while we're dead. Notice that this explosion is extra big with a slower decay, and that makes the death feel more dramatic. This all works, but without sound, this game just feels flat. So we're going to add in some extra code to take care of that. And if you think my art is bad, my sound design is even worse. So I'm not even going to try to create something here, and just grab something from opengameart.org. I found this one that's called Idiots in Space that happens to have been made for a game jam back in 2015. That alone kind of sold me on it. It has a slow introduction and is kind of dark and moody. I also found a free online effects generator. There's a lot that could be said about how these sounds are generated, but the best thing to do is just click on one of the buttons on the left until you hear something you like, and then you can click the save button on the right. This next part is going to go by quickly. This is much more about the process of adding in a component than it is talking through the code line by line. We're at the point where it's more about the process than the specific lines of code. The first thing we need to do is set up the sound folder and create a link to it. We did this before with the image directory, and the code for this is in the consts module. And before we can play sounds, we need to initialize the sound mixer in Pygame. That's what these 2 lines of code do. Having to quit the sound mixer and reinitialize it is a strange hack that I don't fully understand. But if I don't do it, there's a 1/4 second delay in the sounds, and it's just intolerable. We're going to load the background music in the main file because this is sound that is going to play throughout the program. The second line of this tells Pygame to play the music on an infinite loop. The sound effects are loaded directly by the corresponding modules. Note that you have to make sure the sound mixture is already loaded in the main script for this to work. The sounds are loaded at the same time the graphics are loaded. This puts them into memory so that they are available to be played. And then we play the sounds when we create the sprites. And in just a few short lines of code, we've added a completely new dimension to the game. The nice part about this is that upgrades to this portion of the game are simple. You just replace the sound files with your own and then update the names of the files in the appropriate places. In the next video, we're going to continue to expand the game by adding some common features that you might expect, such as points, lives, and a shield.